Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Right to Read Initiative. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and I have the pleasure of being joined by Tiffany James and Mike James from NESSE. And today we're talking about improving literacy for dyslexics. And this is a topic that is very near and dear to all of our hearts, I believe, seeing as the three of us are dyslexic. So hello, good day. Why don't you each take a moment and tell listeners who you are and why you're so passionate about dyslexia?
Okay.
You go first. Well, my name is Tiffany James. I'm the Director of Education for NESSE Learning. I am the mother of some dyslexic children. And so, and I'm dyslexic myself. So my story started like a lot of other mothers of dyslexic children. I was a teacher and I wanted to find out how to help my own children. And that started me on this journey, retraining as a dyslexia specialist later in my career. And now I get to work at NESSE and help children learn to read all over the world. So really blessed by that. This is Mike.
Yeah, I've got dyslexia and had a very tough time at school. Went through about 5 different schools before I was finally kicked out. They wouldn't take me back anymore. And I was homeschooled. And my mum taught me in a way I could learn, and that changed my life. And so a few years later, I was able to go back into the school system, and this time I could read and write, even though it was still difficult. And I was able to survive the system. And then after that, she started up a dyslexia center to help kids in the city. It grew and grew from just a small room in a home to a whole center of 300 students. She had about 20 teaching staff, educational psychologists to assess. And after college, I went to help her out over the summer, just answering the phone. And I heard parents, and they were crying because they didn't know what to do to help their children. And that struck a nerve with me. And it reminded me of my time at school, and I decided to help her. And so I retrained as a specialist dyslexia teacher. And we taught together for 10 years, running that center. In the meantime, I realized that the ideas and the techniques that they were using were so good, they needed to be helping more children. And so many children don't have access to an experienced, qualified specialist teacher that we put it all online and made NESSE. And that was over 20 years ago now, and NESSE has grown and grown. I mean, it started out, it was just me in my classroom on a Friday afternoon. And it slowly, we took on more people. Now we've got several offices in the US and in the UK, and we have a team of animators and sound people, and it's become a monster itself. But the reason it's called NESSE is because it's such a big program, because children with dyslexia, they need lots of overlearning, lots of repetition. And to stop that becoming boring, you make it into a game. Everything should be game orientated, but in a strict structure. And so it became, the resources were huge. That's why it became NESSE.
Wonderful. That's amazing. And I think one thing that's important to highlight from both of your stories, and I know my own, is you get that dyslexic child, typically it's a mama bear, at least in the past, where, the mom has been at home or had the additional time to spend on it. And that's how a lot of the schools specializing in dyslexia have started over the years. I know in my own story, I went to 2 schools that were just started by dyslexic families and parents realizing that it's better to tutor someone else's child than your own. And then, my mom became the president of the International Dyslexia Association, and the story goes on and on. The big thing to take away is currently and historically, dyslexics are not getting what they need in the public education system. And we need to recognize that it's not the fault of the child or the family. And we need to look at making systemic change. Now, the three of us have all been doing great advocacy work over the years. I know, Tiffany, you've written What I Need. Dyslexias can reach the stars and shine. And then Mike, you wrote Dyslexia Explained. And these are both, really great books that help individuals who aren't familiar with dyslexia understand what it is, what it means, and recognizing that we can do more to make these individuals shine. And right now we're recording this in the month of October, which is Dyslexia or Learning Disabilities Awareness Month. And we really need to highlight how these children, these adults, these teens have the right to read. And this podcast was started as a response to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read public inquiry. And it's kind of grown from there. So we need to make sure that these individuals have the support that they need, and recognize that through the research that has been done, the billions of dollars that has been spent on learning how the brain learns to read, there's actually a lot that we can do early on. So based on your experiences with dyslexia, what is the best way that you feel, through all the stories that you hear from parents, teachers, educators, and individuals, what has been your experience of the best way to get the best outcome for these kids so that they can reach the stars and shine?
Early. I mean, we need to, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it has to be early. And so often we see globally that it really depends on where you are in the world. There are lots of different systems doing lots of different things, but we see kids that are potentially dyslexic, probably dyslexic, showing the signs early on, and they're just left to wait to fail. They're told, oh, well, they'll grow out of it. It will be something that will just click for them later on. And we know that isn't the case. And we know that early intervention, the right kind of early intervention, changes outcomes for most children. And we're leaving them behind. And a lot of times, what I've been hearing is there's a lot of reliance on assistive technology. Now, I'm all about assistive technology. I use it myself. I recommend it to families, but I don't want it to be used as an excuse not to teach the children to read, which is what I see happening. They're not even being given the opportunity to learn to read, and they're just saying, oh, well, it's okay. We can just give them a reading pen. We can give them, something to read and spell for them. They don't need to learn to read. And that's a real missed opportunity in my mind and in my opinion. I also see that there's quite a lot of economic reasons for this happening. And we see families that have the means for private tutors or to send them to a dyslexia school, and those kids are getting to learn to read. But children that don't have that advantage, that economic advantage, are being left to fail, and or just saying, oh, it's okay, we'll give them some assistive technology, and then they don't even need to learn, so it's all right. So that we have a real passion, Mike and I both, for intervening early.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that assistive technology piece, because that is huge. And yes, assistive technology is amazing. It works great. It helps bring down barriers. It allows students, when their peers are reading silently in the classroom, to listen to an audiobook or to ear read at a level of their comprehension, building up their background knowledge and their vocabulary, that if they are reading books that are at their reading level, they'd miss. And it helps save some of the embarrassment of looking, look, I'm still in a basic decodable and you guys are all in chapter books several grades ahead of me.
Absolutely.
Recognizing that, there's some children that walk into their classroom and they can't read a single book that is available. And we need to put the onus on educators, saying that, first of all, that's not fair. That's not universal design for learning. And you're doing significant damage to these children, their psychological well-being. And, speaking from personal experience, that embarrassment never goes away. Even I remember walking across the stage for my PhD and being like, you know what? I made it. It doesn't matter, but I'm still haunted by what happened in my past.
Yeah.
And it's brought up again as a parent of dyslexics.
Yeah.
Recognizing that it's still happening and seeing how quickly schools push assistive technology, which is great. I am not knocking assistive technology. It opens the doors, but it also shuts them at the same time. If we use it as, here's the assistive technology, use it, we need to say, okay, this is what's going to help you keep up, but we're still going to give you the work that you need to succeed and do well. And the thing that we need to highlight is that assistive technology is all fine and good while students are in schools, and the schools are responsible for providing them with it. But the day they leave school, the onus is on them. Now, everywhere I've checked, it's very expensive to have this assistive technology and the accessibility to use it, the Wi-Fi connections or the data plans. And that, to me, that's not an acceptable alternative unless the schools are willing, or the government is willing, to pay for those services for the rest of the individual's life.
I agree with everything that you've just said. Yes, I completely agree, and I'm very passionate about this point, because I think we are taking opportunity, because most of those kids, had we got in there and really given them what they needed when they were 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, most of them would not need to rely so completely on assistive technology. Assistive technology is helpful. That's what it does, is it assists, but they wouldn't have to rely on it because they would have the basic skills necessary to read, write, and spell for themselves.
For sure. And I like to associate or bring up what the case would be for a different individual with a different disability, right? So if we're looking with someone who has cerebral palsy or a musculomotor issue, or who is blind, we make sure that they get as much possible support as early as possible to do the best that they can, whether it is working with an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to improve their ability. If we have a child that struggles to learn those basic biologically primary skills, we make sure, or in most first world places, that they have as much support as they need to succeed. Whereas with something like dyslexia or a specific learning disorder, whether it's in reading, writing, or math, we're not giving the children the same advantage from the beginning. As a parent of children that are, in that early years setting, and with my background, I've been able to pick out several kids. I'm like, yeah, you need to go to an SLP, you need this, you need that. And recognizing that not everybody has my experience or background or yours either, but knowing that we could put someone in public health to do this would make things so much better.
Yeah, agree with you.
I think fundamentally the problem lies with how teachers are trained. I think there's failure I've met so many teachers who, once they are shown the research and they're shown the rules of English and the approach that's needed to help children with dyslexia, they're surprised. They say, well, why wasn't I taught this when I was studying? Why don't I know about this? And that's a failure that has been worldwide. And I think it would change completely the outcome for children with dyslexia with a few simple things that were changed. All teachers need to be trained to understand how to identify and how to support children with dyslexia. All children need to be screened at an early age, as soon as they start school, probably in, 12 weeks after they start, something like that. And that screener needs to be just very, very rapid and identify those children who are at risk. And then all those children need to be put on a science of reading based, structured, individualized program, because we know that all children learn at a different pace. And some children find reading and spelling easy. So they can also follow this approach and they will get to the finish line first. Okay, children with dyslexia is going to be harder for them, but they might be really good at something else. However, they can learn. That's what they need to understand. And by failing to give teachers the tools they need and the training they need to help these children, the children are failing. And that doesn't need to happen. And it's just happening time over time over time. The same thing that happened to Tiffany and I and you is still happening to children today. And those children are being scarred. They're being damaged by their school experience. And teachers don't want that to happen. Teachers want to help the children, but they're just not aware of what it is they need to do. So yeah, following even just some basic things, like we have a dyslexia training course that we give away for free during Dyslexia Awareness Month. And just teachers that go through that, they'll immediately have a better understanding of how to support children with dyslexia. And
maybe then it kind of opens their mind to start seeking other information, learning.
But every school should have at least one specialist teacher who is experienced, who is qualified, that can train the other teachers as well and help give some individual support to those students that need it. And then if you can, and you can use technology, excuse me, that's like Nessie or something else that helps children on an individualized basis. Excuse me, let me drink.
Definitely. And I'm glad you brought up the teacher education component of this, because again, globally, we're seeing this severely neglected. When we look at the incidence of dyslexia, we're seeing estimates from 10 to 20% of the population. Now, this means that every year, unless you are going to be teaching at a school that has entrance exams and screens these students out, you are going to have a student in your classroom with dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. So our teacher education programs need to address this from the start. Having teachers understand more than reading a silly piece of paper that has, a dyslexia simulation. I remember in my teacher education program, they handed it out in our special education class, and they gave it to me and I read it perfectly and everybody else read theirs perfectly. And the people that were doing the demonstrations like, well, there's one that's supposed to be hard to read. I'm like, yeah, you gave it to the dyslexic. That's not going to help you do the demonstration.
No.
Recognizing that these best practices, this structured literacy or instruction based on the science of reading, whatever you want to use, science-informed literacy instruction is going to benefit every student in the class, whether it's the student that's going to get to the finish line first or the one that's going to struggle to get there. And more importantly, or equally as importantly, it's going to help your English language learners. So recognizing the global society that we have and understanding that you're going to have students in your class that English is not their first language. And while they may not have dyslexia, these strategies while learning a second language, especially when we catch it early, and say if it's a student in kindergarten who's just starting to learn English and their brain still has the ability to recognize new phonemes that are not native to their language, this practice is going to help support them to succeed. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning, yes, there are those like ourselves that are dyslexics and have that passion to do more, but the vast majority of individuals who enter teachers college or a professional certification program are individuals who hit that finish line first. They don't know, or they don't remember how they learned to read. They just remember reading. And that difficulty of saying, well, just because that's just how you do it, that's how we fell into this whole language balanced literacy thing. And just because you're able to do it doesn't mean you're an expert in understanding how it's done. You know, if we look at other professions or other skills, yes, you may be able to swim, but it doesn't mean that you're an expert in swimming and can teach everybody all the strokes that they need to succeed, especially when we're looking at biologically secondary processes. And what I mean by that is biologically primary processes are ones that the brain is pre-wired to develop. Speaking, talking, walking, moving, understanding text. But something as difficult as reading, mathematics, writing is biologically secondary. The human brain has the ability to develop these skills, but it doesn't happen without external input.
Yes.
And recognizing that we need to provide the support to make sure the brain is in a position to develop these skills, because we are performing that brain surgery, teaching the brain to rewire itself, which it has the ability to do, to perform these tasks. Now, that's where we need to make sure that teachers have the understanding of the phonological awareness, of the phonemic awareness, of the morphology. Yes, it may be something that they were even aware of going through their education when they were young, but by the time they're at the age to teach, they'll probably forget. I know I can't remember all the activities that I did in kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, grade 3, or, you know, in those primary years of school. I can't tell you every lesson that we did. I can't tell you how it was taught to me. I just know it didn't work.
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand that we're talking about a phonics-based approach for early age children, and that this approach sometimes fails because teachers introduce it too rapidly, and children all learn at a slightly different pace. So once teachers have been trained to understand the most effective ways to teach children, using a phonic-based system combined with developing phonological awareness skills and phonemic awareness, then but that also needs to be graduated so that the children that are going to take longer can spend longer. So that way they succeed. And all the research shows that early intervention, right at the beginning, as soon as a child starts finding things difficult, if they can get that extra intensive support, get more time on something, so then the outcome over their whole school changes. So this is really, really important. And the thing that would transform everything is not delaying this support at a very early age.
I think Mike mentioned that because in the UK, there's a mandated phonics check. And as an American living in Britain, I was really surprised that I kept getting all of this feedback through our social media with people saying, well, my child's dyslexic, so phonics doesn't work for him, or phonics doesn't work for her. And I kept hearing it over and over again. And it still is kind of a pervasive belief system that phonics doesn't work. So what seems to be happening is, so that the phonics check is there, and that's great. And they're teaching phonics to 4 and 5-year-olds, which is wonderful. But I think they're getting tripped up when the child doesn't pass the phonics check. Something is happening at that point, and they're not really taking it further. One thing I have noticed is they were using in some schools flashcards of the nonsense words that will be on the test to help
start teaching to
the child pass the test. So they have clearly no understanding of why nonsense words are used as part of the assessment. They obviously don't understand if they're flashing up the cards and trying to get them to memorize what that looks like so that they'll pass it. And then the kids still can't read.
Yeah, but the problem is the teachers don't
understand.
Assessed on are rated.
That's
on
true.
How many of them
pass the phonics?
So of course they're teaching to the test.
Yeah.
But instead, if the test was just used as a way of seeing where the student needs help, then it would be fine.
Right.
But it's because they're rating the teachers that way. But it's not just that. So when you were teaching in your school in Texas, you ran a 3-year study of students that were using a paper-based phonics system where it was whole class against a technology-based system, which happened to be Nessie, which was individualized. Mm-hmm. And the results were incredible. So the individualized approach, they all made incredible progress, but the whole class one, they were reverted.
No, they actually regressed a bit, which was really surprising to see. And really experienced teachers in a well-known phonics program that I don't have any problem with. I think it's a good way to teach phonics. But yes, where that one was breaking down is obviously they began at page 1 and ended at page 212, and every single child was meant to stay on the same pace. And early on, kids are splitting into groups, and some of them are mastering this quickly and some are mastering it slowly, and some need more work here and others are ready to go on. And by holding everyone to that same pace, you got a few kids in the middle that were getting just what they need, and you had kids that were ready to move on to complex text, not being allowed to do that. And then the little dyslexic kids on this end not getting the what they needed. They hadn't mastered the concepts before they moved on to the next thing. So yes, the individualized approach is important.
So if a student comes to our teaching center, for instance, they will be put on an individualized program where the teacher looks at what targets exactly what they need and then gives them intensive support around those areas. And that's the thing that works for children. They'll all learn, they'll all get there, but they need intensive individualized support. And that is pretty much impossible to give in a class unless you have technology like a computer program like Nessie, or you have a specialist within the school that is able to withdraw and help them. And that's really what's missing, an understanding of how to help these children and having the resources there within the school. And like I said, it is a hidden disability. And I think all children with disabilities are probably not served as adequately as they should be. But because dyslexia isn't a visible difficulty, then these children are being left to fail.
Definitely. And there's a couple of things that I think are important to address there. One is the phonics isn't working argument. Now, there are great phonics programs and they're not so great phonics programs. So we need to recognize all phonics programs are not created equal, and we need to teach to mastery in a systematic, explicit format, so that if a student misses Monday because they were sick, they still understand Monday's lesson. We need to build in the cumulative review and practice, seeing these phonics occur in different opportunities. And that's where things like decodable text come in handy, because we're asking the student to read the books that they have the skills to read. As they progress at whatever rate, we will provide them with appropriately skilled text. I don't want to say leveled text, because that goes into a whole other argument. But understanding that with this, we are going to get 97% kids reading or above. Now, I do want to take a moment to mention those minimal percentages. Now, these are individuals. There are some that will not be able to read because they do not have the cognitive capacity to read. If an individual cannot comprehend spoken language at an adequate level, then they cannot read. That should be a logical argument. Now, this does not mean if an individual is non-speaking that they don't understand or comprehend the language, and that a structured literacy approach would not help them. There are several non-speaking autistic individuals who can read and communicate well. They would have learned better with a structured literacy approach, because then they wouldn't have had to grasp all these rules based on the flashcard drilling that they had. There are also individuals with severe cognitive impairments that at one point would have been called the R word, right? And they don't have the cognitive capacity or the working memory to hold the information in their minds to blend or to identify the phonics, the grapheme phonemes that they're seeing in the word, and blend those together. Those are the only individuals that should be taught to read the word as a whole word, so that they do develop some reading vocabulary. Now, these are not the dyslexic students. These are not the students that you're going to see in your classroom every day.
There's a very small percentage you're talking about as well.
These are students that teachers will very likely go through their entire career never teaching, because it is such that small percentage of the population. And just as in school, you don't learn, or your teacher's college, you don't learn about the students with subintentional heterotopia, because it is an extremely rare condition. And if you come across it, go to the parent. They'll tell you exactly what it is and what you need to do for this child, versus something so common as dyslexia or ADHD, some combination of that. You're going to see it in their classroom, just like autism. You're going to see in your classroom pretty much on a yearly basis. And you need to have the skills to support these students every year in your classroom. The skills that you learn to support these students aren't going to hurt anyone in the class, and they're going to allow those students to excel. And recognizing that a systematic explicit phonics program doesn't mean you have to exclude the incidental phonics teaching and morphology teaching that's going to help the other students within the classroom. And that's where it is highly beneficial to have external support, especially for those beginning teachers that haven't developed the fluency or the ability to use a multi-tiered system of support independently on their own. And it can be very difficult year to year, depending on your classroom composition, to do so.
Earlier you mentioned balanced literacy, and I just wanted to say that for students with dyslexia, that will not help them. It's a smattering of phonics combined with the existing whole language approach to teaching. And that's not going to help children with dyslexia, because they need a far more intensive, structured approach. Basically, the Alton Gillingham principles. You won't go wrong if you follow those.
And recognizing some of the strategies that we see in balanced literacy, such as the 3 cueing, looking at pictures and context and meaning and what you think would go. These are strategies that if we look at the fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance imaging studies of poor readers and dyslexic readers, these are skills they already try to employ to try and figure their way through. We don't need to teach children these skills
To do that, no.
It's something they'll develop on their own, and they're ineffective strategies as soon as the pictures go away, right? And we have new vocabulary being introduced. You can't guess how to read a word if you've never heard it before, right? And as we progress to more difficult texts and expect children to do academic reading, that is where their vocabulary explodes, and we don't have the time to explicitly teach them every single word they're going to come across. They need to have the skills to decode the word, recognize what it says, add it to their vocabulary by learning the meaning of the word based on what they are reading. They cannot then guess what it says when they don't have all the other pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I would go further and say that a whole language approach discriminates against children with dyslexia.
Definitely.
Because they're never going to succeed that way. It's ineffective for the children with dyslexia. And whereas if you use a science-based approach to teaching reading, all children will develop. So why isn't it being followed? It's bizarre. I cannot understand it. The science is there, but it's not being followed.
And I think, at least what I believe, and I've spoken to others that feel the same way, a lot of the argument that we have, or that I've heard, is about teacher autonomy and, the ability for them to choose what they're using in their classroom. But as a dyslexic, as the parent of a dyslexic, I've worn many hats as a dyslexic. I don't need to list them all, but I believe that we need to take care of the young child, the individual that we are teaching, their social, emotional well-being, more than we need to do for the professional that is teaching them. They should have the professional autonomy to choose whether the students in their classroom learn to read because they feel uncomfortable learning about best practices for teaching reading, as informed by the billions of dollars that have been spent on reading research, of the tens of thousands of studies that have been done and concluded through meta-analysis, multiple meta-analysis, using different keywords, looking at different things, looking across disciplines, not just the teacher education discipline, and come to a consensus of what we need. I was very fortunate to listen to a talk by Dr. Stephen Dykstra last week, and he had this bullseye target on his slides with the bullseye being red, and he said, you know what, everybody needs to know the bullseye. This is the science of reading, and this is structured language and literacy. This is what's going to get the vast majority, we're talking 95, 97% of students, to learn how to read. Every teacher needs to have that skill set. And when they come across a student that isn't making the same gains and success, that's where they need to go to the outer layers of the target. And that's where additional knowledge comes in. But everybody needs that base knowledge in the target to have it so we can get the success at a rate that is going to do so much better for society, right? It's not just teaching children to read, it's teaching individuals to be functional members in society, so they don't misread information, so they are informed in their voting, so they have the ability to perform the tasks that they need for meaningful employment. With this technological world, we're seeing the unskilled labor jobs significantly decrease. So when we are producing a large number of individuals who are not even functionally literate, we are setting up the system for failure and huge costs to serve those individuals.
Yes.
It also affects self-esteem, confidence. And I mean, as all three of us have mentioned, we was probably scarred by our school experiences emotionally. And that's not the outcome that teachers want for their children. But it can be a difficult pill to swallow, to think that you've been teaching for many years in the wrong way and leaving children with dyslexia behind.
Something we encounter a lot.
It is difficult for teachers to accept, but I know that the best teachers are beginning to understand that there are gaps in their knowledge, and they need to learn about structured literacy. They need to understand about the science of reading and start to adapt the way they teach.
And we're not blaming them for things they didn't know. If they go on and take the learning leap, I've spoken to many fabulous educators through this podcast that, are like, I've even spoken to reading recovery specialists or former reading recovery specialists who, once they learned about the science, they did that deep dive that is essential, and they've made significant difference. And I know one teacher that I totally admire, and she's retired now, and in her retirement, she is doing absolutely everything she can to educate anyone who will listen on best practices for teaching reading, and recognizing that these programs, when they were created, we didn't have the knowledge that we do today to know that it's harmful. I personally was a non-responder to reading recovery. Those are lessons that I remember.
Yeah.
And, I can remember sitting in the library with this gentleman and getting so frustrated, and that's never gone away.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only one who is a responder to reading recovery. There's actually quite a high percentage. And then when we look years later, we don't see the benefit. So now that we know this, we need to put it on the chopping block and say, until they make it so it's aligned with the science of reading and structured literacy, which they may well do. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it would take a complete reimagination and a lot of money to make it at a program where we have the evidence, when there are other programs that do have evidence. And we see this with other prominent programs, and even, professors that created it gone on sabbatical, and universities that supported these programs are stepping away, recognizing that this is happening today, currently, right now. We need the school systems to say, okay, it's on fire. We know not to touch it. It's hot. We need to move away from it and go to what's best for our students, recognizing that this isn't going to happen overnight, giving them that leeway to go. And, the research is saying this takes like about a 5-year process to go from a balanced literacy to a fully structured literacy environment. Giving them that leeway and that learning is fine, but making sure those dyslexics that today are in those classrooms still get the support.
They're looked after,
and looked after. As a parent, as I mentioned earlier, my mom was a huge dyslexia advocate, brought all this stuff to where I live 20 years ago. was talking to the, the big people in charge, and no changes were made. And the frustration that she feels, the frustration that I feel, because I spent many hours at the television stuffing envelopes with paper to try and get this information out there, to know that my children are still struggling for the exact same reason when it is preventable. Now, I happen to have children that are severely dyslexic. So even though they had early intervention and support and strength, they still struggle. They still need that and continue to need that throughout their education. They will likely need to use assistive technology if they decide to go to post-secondary institutions. That's fine. I am 100% fine if they need to have an e-reader. Recently, I was going through, my old files and whatever for Dyslexia Awareness Month, and I came across the psychoeducational assessment that I had in, within 18 months of finishing high school, because in Canada, at least, you need to have a psychoeducational assessment done within 2 years of graduating if you want the additional support at university and post-secondary institutions. Now, I was reading at a grade 8 level when I graduated, and recognizing that at university, I needed to read at a higher level, and understanding that I needed support doing so. So I was able to get the support. And, one thing that we haven't really discussed yet when it comes to assistive technology and adaptations that are made for students, that I personally feel is important to discuss when we're talking about literacy and individuals' dyslexia, is recognizing that the strategies and the assistive technology available doesn't always work. Recognizing that just because you give a student an e-reader or a pen or something like that, just because they can be taught to use it, does not mean that they're going to be comprehending what they're doing. Just because you give them a computer to type doesn't mean that it's going to work for them. Just because you teach them different infographics and they can use them doesn't mean that it's going to support their learning in a meaningful way. For example, personally, I can't use an e-reader in order to comprehend a text at the deepest level. Even though I am a very slow, painfully slow reader, I have to read through textbooks, read through journal articles myself. I need to take notes by hand. I am a far faster typer, but in order to have that deep level of comprehension, I need to do it myself. Recognizing that if I was forced to always use this strategy, then it wouldn't. And I can personally remember in grade 10, I had a very well-meaning dyslexic teacher who decided that if it worked for him, it damn well was going to work for me. And realizing, it was very hard for him to understand that the strategy that he was using, Project Can You Let Lucy Out, was not going to work for me. And that was difficult for him to understand. Sorry, my puppies just knocked out my screen. And recognizing that we needed to use methods that worked for me so that I could do well. And
because it is individual, isn't it? All dyslexics, all learners are individuals, and we need to develop the strategies that work for us.
Well, yeah. So it's best when I taught a lot of teenagers, the most effective way was to present them with several strategies, and they would kind of find their own way and find the thing that works for them best. And moving on to talking about older people with dyslexia, when they need accommodations, because you never stop having dyslexia. So the speed of reading, the reading comprehension, the speed of getting thoughts down into typing thoughts down into writing, these are all things that are going to be slower. The processing of language is slower for children or for anyone with dyslexia. And that needs to be understood by the educators.
One thing that didn't mention, he talked about not being able to read or spell his own name when he was about 7 years old, maybe 7 or 8 years old, something like that. So after Pat homeschooled him, he went back after being taught to read. He went back to school at the top of his class, and before he became a teacher, he actually went to law school and graduated at the top of his class at law school. Now, it was really hard. We were quite determined, but he actually did that before he became a teacher.
I think being able to have a basic level of literacy, reading and spelling,
Daddy, I need him now.
is essential for anyone's self-esteem.
Yes, it is essential for self-esteem.
Definitely. And recognizing that we need to do what we can to help build the self-esteem, and recognize that, I know for me, I had a tile that was given to me when I was younger that said success is the best revenge. And it's one that I've made copies of for students in dyslexia programs. And, it's just that, I need to understand that I have to work 10 times harder than anyone else in my classroom if they're not dyslexic, and know that it's going to give me the strength to succeed. It's going to allow me to learn things that others haven't. So I have 3 siblings. There are 4 of us in the family, 4 kids in the family. 2 of us are dyslexic and 2 of us aren't. And recognizing the difference in education is huge. I mean, non-dyslexic, they're hard workers, they're great people. But my sibling that has dyslexia and I have approached things differently in life. And it's really funny because we've both chosen professions that tax our weakest areas significantly.
Yes.
And knowing that hard work does pay off, and that we can do things to allow success, even though it's an area of difficulty. When we have students that have dyslexia, have damage, we need to do damage control.
Yes.
We provide them with the support, not just the academic support, but the social, emotional support that they need, not to necessarily be able to undo the damage, but give them skills to cope with it. Because there is always going to be that scared little dyslexic child that feels stupid and a waste of someone's time.
And often, from my experience, often that has to be done first or in conjunction with any type of instruction that you're giving. There are those bits that you need to take into consideration right away. And then you really start to see the child grow, both in the way they feel about themselves and their academic skills.
Our dogs are getting restless as well.
We're underneath the table.
Kathryn, we're going to have to wrap up in a minute so I can go and look after them.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I think we've definitely hit on some of the important points that are available when it comes to giving dyslexics the chance and the opportunity to succeed, because they are brilliant minds that if given the opportunity to succeed, the support to succeed, can do amazing things.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining me today, and I'm sure anyone listening can reach out to any one of us if they're wanting more information. Your books, which are great ones for kids to go through. Once I finished reading them, I handed to all of my kids so they could read them afterwards. And they've got great images. There's a new one that I don't have yet. Sorry, can you remind me of the title of that one? Isn't it?
Improve your smelling.
Oh, right.
So
I need to improve my smelling. It's not very good.
It's all the rules of reading and spelling that lots of teachers need to know, and that parents might find helpful as well.
It's presented very simply. So it's kind of like it's a fun illustrated kind of reference book that you can go back and look up particular. So it would help with homework, or all of these teachers that we're talking about that didn't have the benefit of this kind of language teaching, that may need to brush up on how English works together. Yeah.
It's just come out, so it's free at Nessie.com
as an ebook.
As an ebook, and
the printed versions are
hoping to get it on Amazon soon.
I think they're just about ready for, they'll go up soon.
Wonderful. Thank you.